Yes, my friends, the Miami Dolphins offseason is officially underway, and after watching Super Bowl 59, one thing is clear. If Miami wants to compete at the highest level and have a legitimate shot at making it to Super Bowl 60, they must dominate in the trenches. The Philadelphia Eagles put on a masterclass in offensive and defensive line play, completely crushing the Chiefs. And that, Dolphins fans, is the biggest lesson we should take away from the Super Bowl. If Miami doesn't build up their offensive and defensive lines, they will continue to fall short of true AFC contender status. I have something important to talk to you about today. But first, make sure you hit that like button if you really want to see a stronger Miami Dolphins in 2025. If possible, comment something like this: "Go Dolphins! I believe in you." Let's be real here. If the Dolphins had been in that game instead of the Chiefs, they probably would have suffered the same fate. Miami's offensive line struggles have been well documented, and while the defense had some flashes of brilliance last season, they ranked 27th in both sack percentage and sacks per game. That simply won't cut it when you're competing against quarterbacks like Patrick Mahomes, Josh Allen, and Lamar Jackson. The blueprint for success is right in front of them. The Eagles dominated the Chiefs without even blitzing, generating 26 pressures, 6 sacks, and an impressive 42.9% pressure rate while rushing just 4 players. That kind of relentless pressure is exactly what Miami needs to replicate if it wants to take the next step. And it's not just the defensive line. The Eagles didn't just win with their pass rush. They controlled the game because they also had one of the best defensive lines in the NFL. Jalen Hurts had plenty of time to operate, and their running game was nearly unstoppable. If Miami wants to build something similar, they must make serious investments in the trenches. Now, I know a lot of Dolphins fans are going to bring up the Tua Tagovailoa debate. Can he win a Super Bowl? Is he the long-term answer at quarterback? Those are valid questions, but let's not forget, people said the same thing about Jalen Hurts. Many doubted whether he had the arm strength and passing ability to lead a team to a championship. But when you surround a quarterback with an elite offensive line, a strong running game, and a suffocating defense, suddenly, they don't have to be a generational talent to win big games. In fact, you could argue that Tua is an even better pure passer than Hurts. He processes the game well, is highly accurate, and thrives in the RPO system. So, if Miami were to build a roster as dominant as the Eagles, could Tua lead them to a Super Bowl? It's a real possibility. The problem? Miami is not close to having that kind of roster in the trenches right now. And that brings us to the real question. How do they fix it? General Manager Chris Grier has a massive challenge ahead of him this offseason. The Dolphins need to make major moves to improve their offensive and defensive lines, but they also face significant cap space issues. Right now, Miami is projected to be roughly $15 million over the cap, meaning they will need to make some tough decisions regarding cuts, restructures, and potential trades. That financial reality makes it even more crucial that they get creative in free agency and nail their draft picks. When it comes to the offensive line, Miami's biggest needs are at left guard and right guard. The right tackle and center spots are solidified with Austin Jackson and Aaron Brewer, and left tackle remains a question mark depending on what happens with Terron Armstead. If he returns, it will likely have to be on a restructured deal, or he could be traded to free up cap space. Either way, improving the interior offensive line has to be a priority. Looking at free agency, there are some intriguing targets. Trey Smith is probably the top name on the market, but he's expected to command upwards of $20 million per year, making it unlikely that Miami can afford him. More realistic options include Will Fries, Kevin Jenkins, Kevin Zeitler, and James Daniels. The Dolphins need to sign at least 2 of these players to plug into the starting lineup. Will Fries is particularly interesting. He had a strong year with the Colts before an injury cut his season short. Because of that injury, he might come at a discount, making him a great value signing. James Daniels is another potential target. He's coming off an Achilles injury, which is always a concern for an offensive lineman, but it could allow Miami to sign him on a cheap 1-year prove-it deal, much like what the Eagles did with Mekhi Becton. That approach makes sense given Miami's cap situation. They need to find undervalued players who can contribute immediately. Signing Fries and Daniels, for example, would address the immediate needs on the interior offensive line while still allowing the Dolphins to draft a young lineman to develop. The draft is another avenue to improve the trenches, and with Miami holding the 13th overall pick, they have some interesting options. On the defensive side, Miami has even bigger concerns. Right now, Zach Sealer is the only defensive lineman under contract for next season. That's a major issue. Sealer was arguably Miami's best defensive player last year, but he needs help. Last season, the Dolphins had some solid contributors like Calais Campbell, Benito Jones, and Shanyul Hahn, but they need a true game wrecker on the defensive line to pair with Sealer. Whether they look to free agency or the draft, adding a dominant interior pass rusher must be a priority. Miami could target a defensive tackle in the first round of the draft, but the question is whether there is a player worth taking at 13. Mason Graham is a top-tier prospect, but he will likely be gone in the top 7 or 8 picks. More realistic options for Miami include Walter Nolan, Kenneth Grant, and Tyreek Williams, all of whom could be available when the Dolphins are on the clock. Another possibility is trading back in the draft. If Miami can move down a few spots and pick up additional picks while still landing a player like Grant or Williams, that could be the best scenario. Another factor to consider is the edge rusher position. Bradley Chubb is a potential cap casualty, and if the Dolphins move on from him, they will need to find a replacement. Some top edge prospects include James Pierce Jr., Mike Green, and Jalen Walker. Miami could look at one of these players in the first round if they decide to prioritize pass rush over the interior defensive line. At the end of the day, the message is clear. The Dolphins must invest heavily in the trenches if they want to be true contenders in the AFC. The Eagles showed the blueprint, and now it's up to Chris Grier to follow it. Dolphins fans, I want to hear from you. Do you think Miami can build a dominant offensive and defensive line this offseason? And do you believe that Tua Tagovailoa can win a Super Bowl if surrounded by an elite roster? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. The biggest challenge facing the Miami Dolphins in their quest to dominate the trenches is not just identifying the right players, but actually acquiring them given the team's financial constraints. Miami enters the offseason with the third worst cap situation in the NFL, sitting roughly $15 million over the cap. That means before they can make any big moves, they must clear space. The most obvious way to do that? Tough decisions on veteran contracts. Terron Armstead's future is uncertain. The veteran left tackle has been a cornerstone of Miami's offensive line when healthy, but injuries have plagued him, and his contract is a massive burden. If Armstead decides to retire, that immediately frees up cap space, but if he wants to return, Miami may have to restructure his deal or explore a trade. Then there's Bradley Chubb. Trading or releasing him post-June 1 could save the team upwards of $19.5 million in cap space. Chubb was productive last season, but with Jaylon Phillips and Andrew Van Ginkel in the mix, Miami might decide to move on and use that money elsewhere, potentially reinvesting in the defensive line or secondary. Xavier Howard is another player who could be a cap casualty. Once the backbone of Miami's secondary, Howard struggled with injuries and inconsistent play last season. Cutting him post-June 1 would save Miami an additional $18.5 million, which would go a long way toward reshaping this roster. These tough decisions must be made before Miami can make any splash moves in free agency. Finding value in the trenches assuming Miami frees up cap space. The priority has to be strengthening the interior offensive line and bolstering the defensive front. As we discussed earlier, Will Fries and James Daniels are two of the top free agent targets for the offensive line. Both players are coming off injuries, which means Miami could get them at a discount. Fries, when healthy, was one of the best pass-blocking guards in the league for the Colts, and Daniels was playing at an elite level for Pittsburgh before his Achilles injury. We hope the Miami Dolphins make the best choices for the 2025 NFL Draft. There's a lot happening behind the scenes, and every decision will be crucial for the team's future. Make sure to subscribe to the channel and click on the video on your screen to stay updated on all the latest Dolphins news. Big moves could be coming, and you won't want to miss them. Go Dolphins!